In 1984, a group of radio broadcasters and operators walked into the abandoned village of El Monzote in El Salvador. Fireflies illuminated the remnants of a massacre that had taken place 3 years earlier. Led by Colonel Domingo, government soldiers had tortured and murdered 978 people, including almost 500 children. The youngest victim in that place was just 3 years old. Both the U.S. and the Salvadoran governments denied the massacre had even taken place, and the slaughter left few people alive to tell that story. But with the help of Radio Vencermos, one of those survivors, Rufina Amaya shared her testimony exposing both Monterosa and the government funding his crimes. The massacre was one in a long line of atrocities committed against El Salvador's farmers. Since the 1800s, a handful of oligarchs had controlled nearly all of the country's land, forcing laborers to work for almost nothing. In 1932, indigenous farm workers led an insurrection, but the dictatorial government responded by committing genocide against these communities. From then on, one military dictatorship after another ruled the country in concert with wealthy landowners. Their power grew in the 1960s, and when the United States began supplying the regime with military aid, the US wanted to stop the spread of reformist and revolutionary movements, which they saw as threats to capitalism. So they spent huge sums of money training Salvadoran soldiers and death squads, who are like fascist military units versed in brutal counter-insurgery methods. Throughout the 1970s, these forces slaughtered farmers who organized to demand basic rights such as wages, food, and clean water. Finally, in 1980, the farmers and the urban workers formed the Farabundo Martin National Liberation Front. This coalition of guerrilla groups fought to overthrow the dictatorship and build a socialist city that met the needs of laborers. These revolutionaries were attacked from every direction, from Colonel Monterosa, who led a special battalion intent on destroying this uh, this unit using tactics he learned at an American military school. State forces terrorized farmers to stop them from joining or aiding these guerrillas, but one group of rebels would not be silenced: the operators of Radio Vencermos. This clandestine guerrilla, they had a which a radio channel which began in 1981, and its broadcasters Santiago and Mariposa became the voice of the whole revolution. They transmitted news from the front lines and reported military abuses that no other source covered. The station's politics and popularity made it a high profile target, and because they operated in a relatively small area, its broadcasters had to move constantly to evade capture. To communicate undetected, this group modified two radios into telephones linked together through kilometers of barbed wire covering through the countryside. This secret telephone line helped the rebels to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. In addition to reporting news, the radio broadcast they broadcasted educational programs in areas under their control. Here, farmers organized democratic councils to govern themselves alongside cooperatives, schools, and medical clinics. Organizers also encouraged women to participate in these councils. Colonel Motorosa was obsessed with destroying this radio Vencermos. In October 1984, government soldiers finally captured their radio transmitter. Montrosa himself went to retrieve the equipment and held a theatrical press conference celebrating his decisive blow to the subversives. But in reality, the radio team had outsmarted him once again. The transmitter was actually booby trapped. Once Montrose conference, radio members detonated the device over El Mozote, killing the colonel near the village he had massacred. Montrosa's death was one victory in a much larger conflict. The Civil War raged on for 8 more years before concluding in 1992, when peace accords dissolved the oppressive National Guard and allowed the FMLN to become an electoral party. But these accords didn't address problems of deep, which is structural inequality. In 1993, the UN Truth Commission reported that 75,000 people died during the war, yet the Salvadoran legislature prevented the prosecution of war crimes and continues to obstruct justice to this day. As of 2021, no participating American officials have been put on trial, and only one individual from the whole government who did those crimes have been sentenced for war crimes. Historical erasure exists in the US as well, where these and other stories of US intervention in Central America are rarely taught in public schools. But the victims refuse to be forgotten. Rufina Amaya continued to share her testimony until her death in 2007, and survivors of those massacres still organize to denounce state violence. They map all the massacre sites, exhume and bury loved ones, and build sanctuaries and museums, all in the hope of pollinating a more just future.